The bright sun casts its warmth over the House Kwon compound as Master Kwon walks with a little girl following closely behind. She's no older than 10, her small frame barely making a sound as they step into the courtyard. The head servant, an elderly woman with years of experience etched into her face, greets Master Kwon. She notes the girl's presence, tilts her head slightly, and politely asks who the child is. Master Kwon explains he found her at a slave merchant's stall that morning. She'd been overlooked because she was an orphan, and he couldn't leave her in their hands. "I know what they're capable of," he mutters. The head servant listens, her face unreadable as she steps closer to the child. She pats the girl gently on the back and tells Master Kwon it was kind of him to save her from a miserable fate. However, she reminds him that a child doesn't serve much purpose in the house. Inside, Kwon Yoon listens as the conversation drifts through the windows of his chambers. The voices pique his curiosity and he steps outside. His posture is confident, though his expression carries a hint of annoyance. He's 15, already taller than most, and undeniably the future heir of the house. He looks down at the group, his tone sharp. "What's all this noise?" The head servant bows immediately and apologizes for disturbing him. She explains that Master Kwon brought the little girl back from the merchants. Yoon looks unsurprised and dryly comments that his uncle's reputation for sympathy precedes him. "If we left things to him, we'd have half the city's strays living here." The little girl lowers her head even further and whispers her thanks to the young master for saving her from the slavers. Kwon Yoon, towering over her like a shadow, steps closer. His voice is firm but not unkind. "Raise your head. Speak properly. What's your name?" The girl stammers, her voice barely audible as she says she doesn't have a name. She's just a slave. The head servant frowns and nudges her with an elbow, urging her to speak calmly. Yoon waves her off with a sharp look. Let her be. His eyes remain fixed on the girl as he mutters, almost to himself, "No name, huh? Guess that's something we'll need to fix." The young master tells her there's nothing to fear and suggests she loosen up a bit. He says he's been thinking about giving her a name. She freezes, completely stunned. With a laugh, he says she could think of it as a small gift. From now on, she'll be called Seo-hye. It's courtesy of the young master himself. The head servant nods in approval and thanks Kwon Yoon for the thoughtful gesture. The girl's face lights up with pure excitement. She has a name now, a real name. It hasn't even been a full day since she arrived, but something truly significant has happened. Seo-hye. The sound of it fills her with joy, and she clings to it tightly. It's more than just a name, it's the first gift she's ever received in her life. 5 years pass, and Seo-hye has grown into a lovely young woman. She moves through her daily chores with precision and focus. As she sweeps the courtyard, she pauses for a moment and glances around. She senses someone nearby. Outside, Kwon Yoon strolls leisurely through the yard. He looks so much more mature now, and Seo-hye can't help but blush as she watches him. She thinks about how lucky she is to have met him and to serve as his maid. She's heard countless horror stories about slaves being mistreated or even executed by their masters, but her life couldn't be more different. Kwon Yoon has always been kind, always so thoughtful. Whenever he sees her working too hard, he tells her to take it easy so she doesn't hurt herself. He says it with that big, warm smile that never seems to leave his face. From the day he gave her the name Seo-hye to now, he's been nothing but gentle and sweet. She knows how fortunate she is, and that thought makes her heart feel lighter every single day. Seo-hye approaches the young master in the yard, bowing slightly as she apologizes for interrupting him. Kwon Yoon waves it off, saying he was just taking a walk to clear his head. His gaze drifts to the peach blossom tree nearby, and he casually asks how her life has been over the past 5 years. She smiles and says it's been wonderful. He nods, then admits he misses his uncle. Ever since Master Kwon left to train other pupils, things have been quiet and he's spent a lot of time without his guidance. He pauses for a moment, then says he'd feel really sad if Seo-hye left too. The words catch her off guard. She hadn't realized how lonely he's been. She tilts her head downward, lost in thought. Losing his parents at such a young age couldn't have been easy. She knows that pain all too well. Maybe that's why she feels so connected to him. She finally speaks, promising she'll never leave his side. He flinches at her words, and she closes her eyes, her voice steady. She admits it might sound bold coming from a servant, but she takes her responsibilities seriously and assures him he can always rely on her. Kwon Yoon steps closer, his smile softening. He says it's not disrespectful at all for her to say that. It's reassuring. Then, almost instinctively, he touches her lips gently with his fingers, locking eyes with her as he whispers, "That's cute." Without another word, they share a tender kiss beneath the peach-blossomed tree, a moment neither of them saw coming but couldn't resist. Later, Master Kwon arrives from his travels. Kwon Yoon greets him warmly but says he wasn't prepared for his arrival since no message was sent ahead. Master Kwon chuckles, brushing it off, and says there's no need to fuss. It's getting cold, and he leads everyone inside to talk. As the evening settles in, Seo-hye is outside sweeping the yard. She pauses when she hears voices coming from a nearby room. One voice, unmistakably Kwon Yoon's, firmly says, "I mean no disrespect, but I must decline." Her curiosity piqued, she listens closer. Master Kwon's voice follows, calm but firm. He tells Kwon Yoon he's overthinking it and shouldn't take it so personally. The matrimony being proposed is for the good of the family. Seo-hye freezes in place. Matrimony? Her heart drops, and the broom slips from her hands. Inside, the conversation heats up. Kwon Yoon argues that it's not the right time, while Master Kwon counters that as the future head of House Kwon, he has obligations. A patriarch's duty includes continuing the bloodline. Kwon Yoon's jaw tightens as he assures his uncle he has no intention of disgracing the family, but insists he isn't ready for marriage. Just then, a faint rustling sound comes from the yard outside his room. Kwon Yoon pauses, his eyes narrowing slightly as he bites his lip. Kwon Yoon likely knows who was eavesdropping outside. As Seo flees, her mind is racing. The thought of him getting married swirls endlessly. She finally stops, clutching her dress in disbelief. If he's marrying someone else, then what's left for her? The next morning, Seo-hye is in the Kwon compound. She spots the old head servant busy with her tasks and hesitates before calling out to her. Her voice trembles as she struggles to find the right words. The old lady, clearly preoccupied, snaps that she doesn't have time for idle talk and asks her to speak quickly. Seo-hye stammers and says she heard that the young master is getting married. The old lady raises an eyebrow and coldly asks why that matters to her. What business does she have worrying about his marriage? Seo-hye fidgets, her hands twisting nervously, and admits it's been troubling her deeply. She hesitates, but finally blurts out her fear. Will his marriage make her his mistress? The old lady freezes for a moment, then turns sharply to look at her. There's disbelief in her voice as she asks what nonsense the girl is spouting. She says she doesn't know what Master Kwon Yoon has been telling her, but Seo-hye needs to snap back to reality. The young master is on an entirely different level. Seo-hye is nothing more than a glorified slave, the old lady declares. She points to a crumpled piece of paper on the ground and tells Seo-hye to pick it up. See that? That's you, a scrap of litter. That's where you stand. Her words are sharp and they cut deep. Seo-hye freezes, her head hanging in shame. The old lady warns her to stay in her place, or she'll only bring disaster upon herself. The head servant turns and walks away, leaving Seo rooted to the spot. The words echo in her mind. A scrap of litter. She trembles, her hands shaking as the harsh comparison sinks in. Tears blur her vision as she tries to process it all. She's spent her whole life wanting nothing more than to be by Kwon Yoon's side. It didn't matter to her if she was his servant or something more. She reassures herself that the young master has a kind heart. He won't abandon her. He wouldn't. But doubt creeps in as memories flood her mind. She remembers the day he gave her a name, the small gestures of kindness, the fancy biscuit he shared with her, and of course, the kiss beneath the peach-blossomed tree. Those moments felt like magic, but now they seem like a distant dream. Were they meaningless? Tears roll freely down her cheeks as she crouches, her heart heavy with despair. She feels foolish, ashamed for even daring to hope for more. The old lady's words replay over and over. She's just a slave. What was she thinking? Her tears drip onto the dirt as she whispers her only wish to stay by his side. But if that's not possible, then there's no place for her in this house. She feels the weight of the decision settling in her heart. If she can't stay with him, she doesn't know what else to live for. Her mind is made up, and the tears keep falling. Late that night, Kwon Yoon was still in his study, poring over his books. A low rumble sounded from outside, but he barely noticed until a manservant knocked on his door. The man reported grimly that Seo-hye was missing. Her room was empty, and no one had seen her since earlier that day. He suspected she had run away. Kwon Yoon froze, the news hitting him like a blow. Running away? What was she thinking? Meanwhile, Seo-hye sprinted through the woods with a small bag in hand. Her heart pounded as she ran aimlessly, her body drenched in sweat. She stopped to catch her breath, gasping and trembling. It wasn't long before she was caught. The men who found her dragged her back to House Kwon with no kindness. She cried, pleaded for mercy, begged them to let her go, but it was no use. They threw her at Kwon Yoon's feet, announcing they'd captured the runaway. He nodded, dismissing them with a cold, "You've done well." The door closed behind them, leaving Seo-hye on the floor, trembling violently. She pressed her forehead to the ground, sobbing and pleading for forgiveness. Kwon Yoon stepped closer, his voice icy. "Why are you begging?" She hesitated, tears streaming down her face, and finally raised her head to meet his furious gaze. He asked again, "Sorry for what?" Before she could answer, his hand cracked across her cheek. The sting shocked her, and she clutched her face in disbelief. His expression was terrifying as he loomed over her. "Do you even understand what you've done?" he demanded. The cane in his hand was suddenly in motion, slashing across her legs. Each stroke left her gasping in pain, tears soaking her face. She screamed for mercy, promising never to run again, but he wasn't moved. "You promised me," he snarled, his voice laced with bitterness. "You said you'd never leave my side, and this is how you repay me? You're just like everyone else." He dropped the cane, but his anger didn't subside. Instead, he let out a bitter laugh, one that sent chills down her spine. Her trembling didn't stop, and neither did her tears. She barely recognized the man before her. For the first time, she wondered if there was anything left of the kind boy who once named her under the peach tree. Kwon Yoon stopped suddenly, his breathing ragged. "You never meant what you said, did you? After everything I've done for you, you were just going to abandon me like everyone else." His voice cracked with a mix of anger and hurt. He leaned closer, his gaze unsettling. "I should punish you, make you understand what loyalty means." He stepped back, pacing the room, muttering under his breath. "An animal like you doesn't understand gratitude," he said, his tone colder than ever. Seo-hye trembled, frozen on the floor. These words, so cruel, so unlike him, pierced her deeply. She barely recognized the man she had once admired. Later, she tried to run again. Each time she was caught, dragged back to House Kwon, and faced Kwon Yoon's wrath. Servants whispered among themselves, pitying her relentless attempts. "Why does she keep trying?" one murmured. "It's painful to watch." Another sighed. "She'll never escape. None of us will." Seo-hye was thrown into the young master's chambers once more. Kwon Yoon stood silent for a moment before ordering a servant to fetch a switch. When the branch arrived, he examined it with a chilling calmness. Seo-hye fell to her knees, pleading for mercy. "Please, young master, I'll never disobey again." He raised an eyebrow, tilting her chin up. "Spare me the theatrics," he said with an icy smirk. "This is your third time, Seo-hye. What makes you think you deserve mercy?" His grip tightened slightly, then he let go, stepping back. After a pause, he spoke again, his tone softer but no less unnerving. "You're afraid, aren't you?" He smiled, almost kindly. "Don't worry, I won't punish you today." Relief washed over her face, but it was short-lived. His expression twisted into something sinister. "Or maybe I will," he said, the hint of a cruel laugh escaping his lips. Kwon Yoon ordered her to stand. She obeyed, trembling as he circled her. "You need to understand," he said, his voice low but sharp, "that disobedience comes with consequences." He struck her legs lightly with the branch, enough to sting but not to wound. Each strike was calculated, each one a lesson, as he delivered his version of discipline. When it was over, he set the branch aside, his tone unexpectedly calm. "Seo-hye," he said, his voice almost gentle, "don't make me do this again." He turned and left her alone in the room, leaving her shaken and confused. Seo-hye, despite the pain and humiliation, clung to a faint hope. Somewhere, buried deep within the young master, was the kind boy she once knew, and somehow she had to find him again. Seo-hye could barely keep her balance after the strikes. The pain was unbearable, and her legs trembled with each attempt to stand. When the branch snapped in two, Kwon Yoon paused, a twisted smile on his face. "Seems like that was too much for the branch," he mused, before turning to look at Seo-hye, still trembling on the floor. "Get up," he ordered, his voice colder than ever. Seo-hye struggled to her feet, the weight of his words and actions sinking in deeper with each passing moment. There was no comfort, no reassurance in his presence. She stared at the floor, her mind racing with confusion, pain, and fear. For a brief moment, the young master looked at her with an unreadable expression, as if debating something in his mind. Seo-hye almost instinctively did her best to compose herself, clenching her hands into fists, determined to show that she would not be broken completely. "Why do you keep doing this?" Kwon Yoon asked, his tone still cold, though there was an edge of frustration in his voice. "You think this will make me change my mind? You think this will make me see you differently?" Seo didn't answer. She couldn't. Every word seemed to trap her further, and all she wanted was for the pain to stop, for the fear to ease. But deep down, she knew she was in a much darker place now. Kwon Yoon turned away for a moment, pacing back and forth. Seo-hye, still on her knees, felt a strange emptiness building inside her. The young master was no longer the person she had trusted. His actions were erratic, unpredictable, and each one left a deeper mark than the last. "Get yourself together," he muttered, as if speaking to himself. "You'll clean up and prepare for tonight. We're not done yet." The words echoed in her mind as she slowly stood up, still trembling. Despite everything, she refused to let herself break completely. There had to be something, some spark of hope left in this darkness. As she walked away, her heart pounded, but she clung to the thought that one day things could change. The night felt heavy, each step she took leading her deeper into uncertainty. But Seo-hye knew one thing for certain. She wasn't ready to give up, no matter how difficult the path ahead might be. Let's talk about the young master a little. Kwon Yoon was the only heir to one of the most influential families in the nation. From a young age, his presence was already well known across the land. His family's history was rich with accomplishment. His great-grandfather had served as the royal vice-chancellor. His grandfather was a respected scholar who taught the Prince of Chosun, and his father had been one of the youngest to serve as supreme chancellor in the nation's cabinet. The Kwon family had political power and influence that few could rival. They even persuaded the royal family to take Kwon Yoon's sister as a concubine to the king, a move that solidified their place at the top. But everything changed when tragedy struck. At just 14, Kwon Yoon lost both of his parents and became an orphan, forced to take on the mantle of the family at a tender age. Despite the loss, he still had his uncle to turn to. The young master, confused and lost, often asked his uncle, "What do I do now?" His uncle supported him, guiding him through the early years. However, as Kwon Yoon grew older, his uncle's political career began to wind down, and when Kwon Yoon reached adulthood, his uncle stepped aside and left the capital, disappearing from his life with hardly any words. Left on his own, Kwon Yoon faced the responsibility of leading House Kwon, but with no clear direction and an empty home, he was unsure what to do. The weight of the family name hung over him, a constant reminder of the legacy he was expected to uphold. Feeling suffocated by the pressure, he removed his hat and stared into the void, wondering what was left for him. The young master sits in his study, reading a book, but eventually stops and glances over his table before turning his gaze outdoors. He reflects on his first encounter with Seo-hye. Her kind voice had made him feel like everything would be all right, and for a moment, he truly believed it. But soon enough, he realized it had all been a lie. Now their relationship is complicated, even intimate. A smirk appears on his face as he thinks about how he's had his way with her so many times. He tells himself he'll never make the same mistake of trusting anyone again. Seo-hye will pay for breaking his trust, and she'll be punished so she never dares to try escaping again. The thought brings a twisted satisfaction to his face. The young master calls out for a servant. A girl rushes to respond, asking how she can help. He asks her to bring Seo-hye to him immediately, with a creepy smile on his face. He mentions that the puff cakes are too sweet and he'd like to share them with her. The servant girl reluctantly carries out his request. She wonders to herself why the young master wants Seo-hye, especially since the puff cakes are so great. She thinks to herself that a lowly servant like her could never understand the ways of the highborns, but that ungrateful Seo-hye deserves punishment for thinking she could abandon their ever-so-gentle young master. Little does she know, the young master is far from gentle behind closed doors. He's a beast, but she'll never see that side of him. The servant girl calls Seo-hye, but our girl doesn't respond, sitting in silence as if she didn't even hear her. The servant, frustrated, kicks Seo-hye in anger. Seo-hye looks up, startled and confused. The servant demands that Seo-hye get up and go immediately to the young master's room. She adds that he mentioned something about puff cakes being too sweet. Seo-hye's face shifts, worry filling her expression as she understands what's coming. Seo-hye walks into the young master's chambers and asks if he summoned her. Kwon Yoon confirms that he did and offers her some puff cakes. She hesitates, sweating, clearly reluctant to accept. The last time he gave her puff cakes was before he changed into someone else, back when he was kind, and she happily accepted them, enjoying the gesture. She takes a bite but almost chokes. He warns her not to eat too fast. Ever since that day, her body seems to reject puff cakes. She coughs violently. Kwon Yoon asks if she doesn't want them, suggesting he'll find someone else to enjoy the treats since maybe they're too good for her. Seo-hye panics. She knows if others find out she rejected such expensive desserts, they'd judge her harshly. She grabs the plate and says she'll have them all, asking if it's okay to take them to her room. She turns to leave. As she steps out, she sighs deeply, but another servant girl is nearby. As Seo-hye tries to walk away, the other servant intentionally bumps into her, knocking the plate from her hands, and the puff cakes fall to the ground. The servant girl, clearly jealous, turns to Seo-hye and scolds her. She accuses Seo-hye of not appreciating the privilege she's getting, saying there are thousands of people who would die for the chance to be treated the way Seo-hye is. Little does she know, she's just jealous because she has no idea what happens behind closed doors. Seo-hye starts sobbing. She's not ungrateful. Her body simply can't accept the puff cakes anymore. The other servant doesn't understand, but judges her anyway. Meanwhile, the young master waits in his room. When Seo-hye finally enters, he asks why she's crying. Did the other servant give her a hard time? Or is something else wrong? Seo-hye, still fidgeting, says she has something to confess. She explains that she can't eat the puff cakes anymore. Ever since that incident, her body rejects them before she even swallows. Kwon Yoon smiles and says he knows. He remembers her first time eating the cakes very well and grins at the memory. Tears well up in Seo-hye's eyes as she starts to feel dizzy. It's strange, right? He remembers the incident, so why would he give her the puff cakes if he knew she couldn't eat them? Kwon Yoon leans in closer, touches her chin, and looks her in the eye. He smirks and says he likes defiling her when she's most vulnerable. He tells her she should appreciate their special relationship and that she shouldn't cry. After all, he's said enough. It's time for her to do her job. Seo-hye's heart races. What job? She crawls over to him, and he embraces her, patting her on the head like a child. He tells her that the house is so big and empty that no one will hear her cry. She should give up on trying to escape or call for help, because no one will save her, no matter how desperate she becomes. His words are chilling, coming from the once gentle, loving young master. How bad can things really get? Is there any hope for Seo-hye? The young master welcomes his uncle, asking him to state his business. Master Kwon greets him and informs Kwon Yoon that he's here to discuss the matter they talked about earlier. The two step inside to get to the bottom of it. The young master asks what matter his uncle is referring to. Master Kwon says he's here regarding the marriage proposal and wants to know if Kwon Yoon has given it any thought. Kwon Yoon remains silent. His uncle continues, acknowledging that it's not an easy decision, but it's Kwon Yoon's responsibility as the soon-to-be patriarch of the House Kwon. As an elder, it's Master Kwon's duty to guide his nephew, which is why he's here. He then pulls out a list and asks Kwon Yoon to take a look. It's a list of prominent ladies from powerful families in the nation. Kwon Yoon scans the list, but for a moment, Seo-hye runs through his mind. His uncle notices his distraction and calls his attention. Kwon Yoon reassures him that he's listening and smiles, appreciating his uncle's concern. Master Kwon leaves with a smile, feeling like a proud papa knowing the young master is all grown up. Meanwhile, Kwon Yoon looks puzzled, wondering why he thought of Seo-hye at that moment. Seo-hye is busy sweeping the yard when the young master calls her. She hurries to his room, probably thinking, "What's up, boss?" Kwon Yoon asks about her bruises from last time, and Seo-hye is all, why are you asking?" She's still hurting, but doesn't want to upset him. The young master says it's her fault for getting hurt. Talk about blaming the victim. He asks Seo-hye to come closer, saying he needs a favor. Let's hope it's not another favor. That'll leave her sweeping up more than just leaves. Kwon Yoon stops Seo-hye in her tracks, asking who allowed her to walk. She quickly gets on her knees and crawls over, which is just plain demeaning. He grabs her head, pulling her closer, and says she needs to take care of him first. Seo-hye is suffocating but can't speak up. Kwon Yoon brings up the rejected puff cakes, saying she hurt his feelings. They get intimate, but he stops, pulls her up, and asks Seo-hye to catch her breath. He needs her clear-minded to help choose his perfect bride. Her eyes widen in shock. Talk about a mood killer. Kwon Yoon mentions 2 marriage offers, one from the Minister of Interior and the other from the Vice-Chancellor's house. He wants Seo-hye's opinion, but she's speechless, tears welling up in her eyes. He says her silence is fine, and they get intimate again. What a heartless move. Kwon Yoon demands an answer from Seo-hye, asking which house he should partner with. She's forced to choose, and with a shaking voice suggests the Minister of Interior's daughter. He agrees, and Seo-hye breaks down in tears. The wedding preparations are in full swing, with a date set for August 9th. Everyone's excited, except Seo-hye, who's heartbroken. The head servant tasks Seo-hye with picking up some items from the market with fellow servant girl Mal-suk. As they browse the market, Mal-suk admires the wedding preparations and envies the bride. Mal-suk points out the bride, the minister's daughter, but her face is covered. Seo-hye is curious and wants to see her face. When the bride finally reveals her face, Seo is struck by her beauty. She's absolutely gorgeous. Seo-hye starts to understand why the young master agreed to her random choice of bride. He deserves nothing but the best, and a fine lady like that is perfect for him. She can already picture them together, standing under a peach blossom tree, sharing a sweet kiss. Seo-hye definitely has an active imagination, but the thought of it all makes her feel down. As she's lost in thought, the fabric she's holding falls to the ground. Mal-suk wastes no time in slapping her and yelling at her for being careless. "It's precious silk," Mal-suk scolds. She says that one roll of fabric could cost more than both their lives combined, then picks it up herself. She tells Seo-hye to keep quiet and that she'll carry it herself. Seo-hye, overwhelmed, bursts into tears right there in the middle of the market. Mal-suk is taken aback. Seo-hye doesn't hold back, crying freely as she questions her reality. She feels like a worthless slave and wonders why she can't be with the young master, her dream man. She cries even harder, and Mal-suk asks if it's because of the slap. She knows she didn't hit her that hard to make her cry. Seo-hye says she's hurting, it feels like the pain is too much, and she can't take it anymore. She knows she has to do something about it. Back at the House Kwon compound, she's still troubled by her thoughts, pacing around the yard, unsure of what to do. She thought running away without a trace was the best solution, but now she's second-guessing herself. Seo-hye wants to tell him she can't stay here any longer, so she heads straight for the young master's room. But is this really the best decision? Will she be able to open up and share her feelings? She walks up to his door and says hello. Kwon Yoon calls her in, and she steps inside, closing the door behind her. This definitely isn't going to be as easy as she imagined. Just one look at him and the words catch in her throat. She can't express herself. Her mind is clouded with thoughts of the beautiful bride. Someone as graceful and refined as him deserves someone like her. Kwon Yoon, not showing much emotion, asks what she wants and why she's here. Seo-hye nervously says she has something to discuss with him. She takes a deep breath and tries to gather her words. What could she say? I don't want you to get married? I love you. If you marry her, I'll have no reason to live? There are a million things she could say to try to change his mind, but she's just a slave and her reality won't change so easily. No words come out. She just stands there, looking defeated. Kwon Yoon, still focused on his book, asks what she had in mind. Seo-hye panics, saying it's not the right time to talk about it. He says that's fine with him. The young master adds that her sudden appearance wasn't a waste, as he had intended to call her in. He says Malsuk brought in pan-fried beef slices and asks if she'd like some. Seo-hye is a little startled. Malsuk's beef slices are her specialty, but right now, Seo-hye has no appetite. The greasy smell makes her feel a bit nauseous. She apologizes, saying she'll have to pass on his offer since she's not feeling well. She politely asks if she can be excused, hoping to get some fresh air. The young master wonders if the beef slices have gone bad and says he'll throw them out. Seo-hye freezes. It hits her. If Malsuk finds out he threw out the dish because of her, she'll make Seo-hye's life miserable. In a flash, she sits down and pleads with him to keep the beef slices. She grabs the plate and starts munching on the meat. Kwon Yoon is taken aback by how quickly she's forcing it down and tells her to calm down, saying it's okay to put the food down. But Seo-hye won't listen. She insists it's delicious and finishes it all. He watches closely as she gulps it down. Seo-hye thanks him for his generosity and with a big smile congratulates him on his upcoming wedding. He flinches slightly at her words. She wishes him many healthy children and a loving marriage. He doesn't seem pleased by her words. Quietly, he asks if she truly wants to see him get married. His voice barely above a whisper, he looks genuinely sad. He's not really surprised because she had mentioned something similar early on. Back then, he told her he might get married soon, and her face showed shock, mixed with sadness. Yet, for some reason, she congratulated him. The only words she could muster were congratulations. He was stunned. He asks if she really doesn't have anything else to say about it, and her response surprises him even more. Seo-hye smiles cheerfully and says that a servant exists only to make her master happy. But deep down, she knows the marriage isn't what he truly wants. He clenches his fist in frustration. The young master wants to be with her. He has feelings for her. That leaves him asking, why? Why does he treat her this way if he claims to have feelings for her? Seo-hye asks to be excused and leaves. He sits in silence for a while, lost in thought. The young master wonders what went wrong. He thought they shared something special, but now he's starting to question if it was all just an illusion. Thinking back, he realizes it was around this time that Seo-hye began pulling away from him. Kwon Yoon wonders if she came today to test him, maybe to see how busy he is with the wedding preparations. It makes sense. He thinks she might still be looking for a chance to escape. The young master steps out of his room and spots Seo-hye with a male servant in the yard. He's taken aback by the scene. The male servant is gently rubbing Seo-hye's hands and asks if she's feeling better. Seo-hye smiles and says she does feel better. The servant keeps rubbing her hands and Seo-hye beams at him, thanking him for the treatment. The sight irritates Kwon Yoon to no end. Inside, he's seething, wondering how she dares smile at someone else right in front of him. This isn't love anymore, it's more like an obsession. He calls out to her. Both servants quickly bow when they see the young master. With a grim look in his eyes, he orders Seo-hye to get back to his room immediately. Something tells me this isn't going to end well. He's probably planning to punish her. A few minutes earlier, Seo-hye is sitting outside, looking sick and feeling nauseous. Dong-sik, the young male servant and her friend, approaches. He notices she looks unwell and asks if she's all right. Seo-hye says she has an upset stomach. Dong-sik offers to give her a hand rub to help. He reassures her she'll feel better soon. Seo-hye stretches out her hand and he begins to rub it. After a moment, he asks how she's feeling now. Seo-hye is surprised, saying she actually feels much better. She thanks him with a big smile. Dong-sik then offers another tip, gesturing to his head. He suggests she apply pressure on her head later for even more relief. Seo-hye promises she'll try it and thanks him again for his help. Just then, the young master calls out to her, ordering her to return to his room immediately. Back in his room, Kwon Yoon demands an explanation. He asks what she was doing with Dong-sik out in the yard, saying he never noticed she had a fling with his servant. Seo-hye tries to defend herself, but he's not having it. He accuses her of seducing Dong-sik. Seo-hye insists it's nothing like that, explaining that he was just helping her with her upset stomach. Kwon Yoon grabs Seo-hye's arm, pulling her closer, and demands the truth. She assures him she's being honest. He removes her top, and they get intimate, despite the broad daylight. Seo-hye thinks hard, wondering what to do, knowing Dong-sik is outside. Kwon Yoon calls Dong-sik, ordering him to finish packing firewood before noon. Dong-sik quickly obeys, and Seo-hye knows what's next. With Dong-sik gone, Kwon Yoon has his way with her. Afterward, Kwon Yoon mentions his wedding, scheduled for the 9th of the month, warning Seo-hye not to cause any scenes. He leaves, and Seo-hye grabs a blanket, feeling bitter. The situation is messed up. Kwon Yoon won't commit to Seo-hye, but won't let her go either. She wonders why he hates her so much. It's frustrating. Seo-hye just wants to be happy. With her stomach upset, nausea, and food irritation, it's possible she might be pregnant. On the wedding day, Kwon Yoon orders his men to lock Seo-hye in a room, ensuring she won't disrupt the event. The men obey, and Seo-hye wonders why she's being confined. She sits in silence, thinking, and wonders if Kwon Yoon doesn't trust her. Soon, there will be a new matriarch in the house Kwon with the arrival of the young master's bride. All Seo-hye can do is wait in the shadows. Maybe, in time, she'll be cast aside. These thoughts swirl in her mind as she folds into her solitude and weeps quietly. Suddenly, there's a knock at the door, and it opens to reveal a friendly face, Dong-sik. He says the young master asked her to drink some water. Without hesitation, Seo-hye begins to pour her heart out to him. She asks her good friend just this once how many guards are outside keeping watch. He asks if she's planning to escape. Today, of all days? He shuts the door behind him and whispers that it's a terrible plan. Today's not the day for an escape attempt. Seo-hye says she can't take it anymore. The situation has reached its breaking point, and she's losing her mind. Dong-sik asks what she means. She can only say, everything. Everything is the problem. She can't bring herself to confess her true feelings to him. It's a sad reality. A slave like her wants to escape because her master won't love her back. Dong-sik keeps a straight face as though he's figured it out. He says she's in love with the young master. Seo-hye flinches at his words. The young man hit the nail on the head, and Seo-hye couldn't even bring herself to deny it. He tells her there are 2 guards outside, but they'll take a break in 2 hours. He promises to give her a signal, and then she can run for it. Seo-hye can hardly believe it. He's actually going to risk helping her. What a true friend. Dong-sik, with a smile on his face, says he can't stand seeing her suffer. Seo-hye hugs him tightly. He warns her she'll have to run far, really far, and never come back, not for him or anyone else. She thanks him for everything, saying he's been her one true friend all these years. Time passes, and the signal comes. Seo-hye peeks out the door. It's just like Dong-sik said, no one's outside. This is her chance. She steps out and runs for her life, heading straight for the bushes. She's trying to figure out the best way to go. Last time, she tried the mountain path and failed. This time, she chooses the riverside. She has to make it this time. Seo-hye runs until she reaches the riverbank. Exhausted, she takes a deep breath, coughing out loud. She thinks she's safe for now, but then loud voices echo from behind her. The men have caught up, and they're not far off. That didn't take them long. Seo-hye can't believe they're already here. Without hesitating, she takes a bold step toward the river. She knows she has to cross it to truly be free. The water is roaring so loudly that it almost feels like it's mocking her. She steps into the water and instantly regrets it. The current is much stronger and deeper than she thought. A misstep could mean death. Seo-hye hesitates. Should she go back? Where would she even go? She has no family, no one to turn to, an orphan slave with no one to help. Is it a lost cause? These thoughts swirl in her mind as she stands in the water, the roar of the river drowning out everything else. The men catch up and point in her direction. She's been found. Panic sets in. Fear freezes her in place. She can't move. If they bring her back to the young master, he'll probably punish her for ruining his wedding. She's not ready for that. The waves feel like the lesser evil. It's crazy, right? She's probably doomed if she goes back, and she might be doomed if she keeps going. She looks to the sky, crying out, "There's no escape, and there is no rest for the wicked." Tears stream down her face as she faces the uncertain future. There was only one way out, and it seemed like death might be the only escape. Seo-hye's heart wished, almost desperately, that the young master would understand. The waves swallowed her whole, sweeping her away completely. The men on the shore stared in shock. She was going under, drowning. Even in her final moments, all she could think about was Kwon Yoon. She thought she heard someone call her name from the water, and for a second, it almost sounded like his voice, sweet and gentle. It dawned on her in that moment, in the depths of despair, that he was everything to her. All she ever wanted was to be with him. Now, it seemed like that dream was slipping away forever. Her life was slipping away too, and yet she felt sorry for leaving him behind. Everything went dark for a while. Then suddenly, there was a field filled with beautiful flowers and fluttering butterflies. The young master was sitting in his room, reading a book, just like always. Someone stood outside his room, and he could feel their presence. It was Seo-hye. She was holding a flower. He smiled, happy to see her, and invited her in. She offered him the flowers she had picked from the mountain. He asked if she'd had a good time. Seo-hye said it was lovely, and that she thought he would like the wildflowers, so she picked them for him. Kwon Yoon smiled and said it was time for him to get back to his studies. He asked her to excuse him. She stood up to leave, but he told her to leave the flowers on the table. He'd asked the head servant for a vase. Seo-hye stood there, a little confused. He told her she could leave the flowers if she wanted. Weren't they for him? She nodded and left them on the table, practically glowing with a big, happy smile. Kwon Yoon thanked her for the thoughtful gesture. She couldn't help but smile even more, thinking how kind and gentle he was. She felt like she was in a dream. For a moment, she wondered if she was dead. In the next scene, they were sitting under the peach blossom tree. Seo-hye promised to always be by his side. Kwon Yoon looked at her, shocked. She said she would never let him feel lonely. It was a bold promise for a servant to make, but she meant every word. He stepped closer, looked her in the eyes, and said there was nothing to it, but he intended to hold her to that promise. And then they kissed. It was the most romantic moment Seo-hye could have imagined. Her promise to him was the sincerest thing she could say. Once again, the two are in the House Kwon household. In the young master's room, they have a rather tense conversation. Kwon Yoon mentions that he's going to get married someday, and Seo-hye looks utterly shocked. Her eyes betray the sadness she feels as she realizes the heartbreaking truth. She can never be with him. The thought of not even being able to become his mistress pains her deeply. It's as if she's standing in the way of his happiness, and that knowledge cuts her to the core. Finally, she speaks. Seo-hye congratulates him on his marriage, and Kwon Yoon looks taken aback, asking if he heard her correctly. She assures him that a proper man like him deserves a proper lady to be his loving wife. He clenches his fist, trying to hide his anger, but it's clear he's upset. Seo-hye, not wanting to stay any longer, asks to be excused, mentioning that she has chores to do. She steps out the door and shuts it behind her. But once outside, she stops and tells herself that she made the right decision. He's not in her league, so she needs to let him go. Back in his room, there's a sudden loud crash, and Seo-hye jumps in alarm. She rushes back to his room and finds Kwon Yoon standing over a broken vase, fuming with anger. The wildflowers she picked for him from the mountains are scattered on the floor. Seo-hye immediately asks if he's okay, noticing the blood on his hand and the piece of glass in his foot. She tries to help, but Kwon Yoon completely ignores the pain and the blood, focusing only on her. He asks her again if she truly wants him to marry someone else. Their eyes meet, and for a few seconds they're both silent, hearts racing, breath shaking. The tension is palpable. Seo-hye struggles to express her feelings, the memory of the head servant's words echoing in her mind. Know your place. Finally, she speaks, her words shocking him even more. She tells him she has no reason to disagree with his marriage. She's just a servant, and she's ready to serve the new lady of the House Kwon. She reassures him that he doesn't need to worry. Her loyalty to the house is unquestionable. Everything goes dark, and then there's light. Seo-hye's vision is blurry, but she's alive. She wonders if she's dead when she sees the young master's face, drenched in water. She realizes she's been resuscitated by him. He looks at her with concern and asks, "Why? How could you do this to me?" Seo-hye starts to piece things together. Kwon Yoon is drenched, and if he's not dead, that must mean he jumped into the river to save her. He shakes her violently, demanding to know why she did it. He asks her to say something, anything at all. Why did she jump into the river? Why put him in this position? Does she have a death wish? Would she rather give up her life than be with him? He throws all these questions at her, but she can't find the words to answer. Weakly, she calls out for the young master, but it's barely audible. The whole situation is strange, but remember, it's the slave era. Slaves don't have real options or freedom. It's all about serving the masters. Kwon Yoon's anger flares. Is that really her only way out? She'd rather die than be with him? That has to sting a man's pride. Seo-hye weakly calls his name again, and her voice fades as she passes out. He orders the men to take her away. The men lift her up and carry her off while the young master is left kneeling behind them. In the next scene, Seo-hye is being tended to by a physician with the head servant present. They check her pulse, and just then, Kwon Yoon enters. He asks how she's doing, and the physician says she's fine. But there's something unusual about her pulse. Seo-hye regains consciousness, but she's still weak. The physician asks if Seo-hye has been feeling fatigued or nauseous recently, and Seo-hye confirms that she has, once or twice. The physician suggests they run a few more tests, but she suspects Seo-hye might be pregnant. Yes, I called it. The head servant looks stunned, and Seo-hye's eyes widen in shock at the mention of pregnancy. Kwon Yoon, with a cold look in his eyes, asks about the baby's health. The physician reassures him that nothing in Seo-hye's pulse indicates any harm to the baby. Kwon Yoon seems relieved and orders the physician to write a prescription for Seo-hye's recovery, insisting on only the finest herbs. With that, he leaves the room. Seo-hye is completely stunned. There are so many things the young master could have said, yet all he said was that she should recover from her injury. Her mind is racing. The head servant leans in and scolds her for doing something so dangerous. Seo-hye apologizes and suggests the head servant head back to the wedding ceremony, but the head servant informs her that the wedding was called off. Seo-hye jumps up in shock. Why? How? Who called it off? The head servant explains that the young master himself canceled it. He practically ran off the moment he heard about her escape. Seo-hye realizes it was really Kwon Yoon at the river. She had been barely conscious, and her vision was blurry, so she wasn't sure of what she saw at the time. The head servant confirms that the young master jumped into the river to save Seo-hye. Seo-hye's thoughts swirl. Her heart races as she stares into nothingness. The head servant leaves to head to the kitchen, advising Seo-hye to lie down and rest for the sake of her child. Seo-hye sits quietly, her mind clouded with thoughts. Kwon Yoon really gave up his marriage for her. He should be angry, but he seemed worried instead. What was he thinking? These thoughts weigh heavily on her. At least there's one positive thing. Her treatment started to change from that day onward. Our girl suddenly became the household's pet, treated with care and respect. She was served the best meals, and she even asked the head servant if all this was really for her. The head servant helps Seo-hye with her spoon, saying she's been instructed to take very good care of her. She mentions she'll be back soon with Seo-hye's medicine. Seo-hye can't believe it and asks the head servant what this special treatment is about. The head servant explains that she's been told to treat Seo-hye like her own daughter, guessing that it has something to do with Seo-hye bearing an heir to the house Kwon. Seo-hye takes a bite of the meal, amazed at how good it tastes. It's like nothing she's ever had before. All this care makes her wonder if, somehow, the young master still has feelings for her. After all, why would he risk his life to save her from drowning in the river? Why would he break off his marriage, which could have secured the prosperity of his family? But no, she tells herself, that couldn't be the reason. It must be something else. She reminds herself to face the truth. She's still just a slave. One leap of faith couldn't change anything. She wishes she could see the young master right now. Some time passes, and she's feeling better. Seo-hye walks up to the young master's room and greets him. He asks her to come in. Kwon Yoon sits in his room surrounded by books, as usual. Seo-hye thanks him for saving her, and he casually replies that it's nothing. He then asks if she hadn't noticed any signs of pregnancy in the past week. Seo-hye is caught off guard and admits she had no idea. After a moment of hesitation, she asks if he knew. Without even looking at her, he replies that there was no way he could have missed something so obvious. Seo-hye's eyes widen in surprise, and the head servant's words echo in her mind. He jumped into the river to save her. No, to save his heir. She gently touches her stomach, realizing the truth. That must have been why. He was trying to protect his child. The silence between them stretches as she keeps thinking, but he finally breaks it, asking if she has nothing more to say. If not, she can leave. Seo-hye wants to say something, but she's holding back. She battles with her own emotions, thinking that everything he did was for his child, not her. She bites her lip and turns to leave, convinced that she was right all along. She is and will always be nothing to him. Tears well up in her eyes as she steps out. Later, it's night and the young master sits alone, drinking. He looks like he's been at it for a while. He sets the cup down and mutters to himself, "She'd rather drown than be with me." The thought hurts so much that he tries to drink it away. Ever since he became an orphan, Seo-hye had always been his solace. She was the one good thing in his life, the one thing that made sense. Even in the strangest times, he thought of her. When his uncle brought up the topic of marriage, all he could think about was Seo-hye. But after she heard about his upcoming marriage, she started treating him differently, like a stranger. He slowly gets up, a little unsteady, and stumbles toward her door. He knows well enough that they can't be together, at least not legally. His eyes are fixed on her door, and his steps are heavy with regret. If only she had trusted him a little more. If she had believed in him, he really could have figured out a way for them to be together. He reaches her doorstep, and as he stands there, her door creaks open. He steps inside, calling her name. Seo-hye is startled by his sudden appearance. He shuts the door behind him and orders her to come to him, with that familiar, almost villainous look in his eyes. It's clear he's drunk, which is unusual for him. Our girl wonders what's gotten into him tonight. He grabs her roughly, pulling her close, her hands twisted from the force. She winces and tells him it hurts. He asks if it really does. She knows that, in this moment, whatever she says won't make a difference. He looks like a man on a mission, and nothing, especially not his current state, will stop him. Kwon Yoon asks her to lift her skirt one more time for him. Seo-hye is stunned by his words. He leans in closer and repeats himself, murmuring that this is the only time she really shows her true emotions. He holds on to her dress, convinced that she only begs him to escape pain or misery, and that's the only leverage he has left, an empty threat. He asks what her response will be. Seo-hye is confused, and he looks her in the eye, wondering if he's truly hurting her. Or is he not? He tells her to say something, anything at all. Later, as they lie together, Kwon Yoon asks her to promise him something. Seo-hye, curious, asks what he wants. The young master says he'll give her everything she wants, glory, fame, and everything that comes with it, if she promises not to run away with his child. Her eyes light up. His words melt her heart. He asks what she thinks about it all. Seo-hye agrees, promising not to go anywhere. The two lay down, all cuddled up. The young master falls asleep quickly, but Seo-hye can't sleep a wink. She realizes that she was right all along. He saved her only to protect his unborn heir. She holds his hand and replays the entire experience in her mind. He had told her to beg. Seo-hye immediately begins to cry, feeling the weight of everything. She's hurt. She asks if he really wants her to beg because she will. She begs him to stop breaking her heart, telling him she can't take it anymore. A new day begins. But Seo-hye couldn't sleep because of what happened the night before. She turns to face Kwon Yoon, leans closer, and gently touches his face, thinking about how disciplined he looks, even in his sleep. She slides her fingers across his lips, realizing that his discipline wasn't the only reason she fell in love with him. She gets up and quietly leaves. As soon as she steps out, the young master opens his eyes, sitting up quickly, disappointed and hurt. After everything she said last night, she still left him. That's the thought racing through his mind. The young master gets up and follows Seo-hye. She walks toward the riverbank, lost in her thoughts. She looks at the roaring waves, remembering the place where she almost lost her life, the river she jumped into. Seo-hye wonders what drove her to take such drastic action back then. She takes off her shoes and dips her feet into the cold water, shivering. She wonders why she didn't feel this coldness when she first drowned. Maybe it was because the young master had saved her and held her in his arms for a while. She pulls her legs from the water, deep in thought. In an instant, someone leaps at Seo-hye and pins her to the ground. It's Kwon Yoon. He's panicking, thinking she wants to take her life again. Seo-hye is caught off guard, wondering what just happened. He yells at her, asking what her problem is, his voice shaking. He asks if she really hates him that much. She notices that he's trembling badly. He asks again, demanding to know why she's so desperate to end her life. "What about the child?" Seo-hye screams back, saying she didn't come here to die. She was just trying to understand why he's been so protective of her. She asks him to think about it. What kind of high-born person would risk their life for a lowly servant like her? It's unheard of. As she sobs, it dawns on her that Kwon Yoon is only protecting his precious heir. She's heartbroken because deep down, she believes there's no place for her in his heart. She's made peace with it, but the thought still hurts deeply. Kwon Yoon admits that she's right. He has been protective of her, but not for the reasons she thinks. He's tearing up now, too, his voice shaking as he says he did it all for her. All he wants is Seo-hye, but why can't she see it? Her eyes widen in shock as she shakes her head, disbelief clouding her thoughts. It can't be. Kwon Yoon assures her that he will love her and their child from the bottom of his heart. He promises to find a way for them to be together, consulting with the elders and improving her status once she gives birth to their heir. Seo-hye hits him on the chest, trembling. He's misunderstanding everything. She's shaking too. She says he's only saying these things because he feels guilty for everything he's done to her. Both of them are trembling as they hold on to each other in this intense moment. Seo-hye opens up completely, expressing her feelings without holding back. She admits that she despises him. She hates him so much. Kwon Yoon hugs her tightly, acknowledging how much he's hurt her. No words can express the depth of her pain. He says that everything he did out of fear. Fear that she would leave him all alone. The thought of being alone broke him, and it was that fear that changed him. Seo-hye cries uncontrollably, telling him that he's broken her heart countless times. Kwon Yoon accepts it all, his own tears falling. He takes full responsibility for everything, knowing he's been a monster. He admits that he's treated her badly time and time again, but he's truly sorry. He apologizes with all the sincerity he has. Kwon Yoon says he'll do anything at all. He pleads with her not to leave him. The two cry, wrapped in a heartfelt embrace, both of them vulnerable and honest. The young master drops to his knees, begging Seo-hye not to hurt him. It's a moment of pure emotion, the first time they're truly honest with each other, and it's beautiful. This is the man she fell in love with, not the one who once hurt her with a cruel, sadistic smile. The sun rises behind them, painting the sky with its golden light. Seo-hye apologizes for the hurtful things she said. She doesn't hate him. She has one request. She asks him to promise that he won't hurt her anymore. She smiles, her heart light. He kisses her on the forehead, swearing his word is his bond, and promises to never hurt her again. The two smile at each other, a beautiful reconciliation, love shining in their eyes. Seo-hye tells him he has nothing to worry about anymore. She's all his now. She tells him she loves him. It's the first time she's saying it openly, and he kisses her deeply in return. As the sun rises, it's like the world is finally in harmony. Love has won at last. After that fateful day, their lives changed in so many ways. Kwon Yoon and Seo-hye spent their time together, with him gently caressing her belly as the baby kicked. The joy between them was palpable. Kwon Yoon laughed, proudly saying that the baby was definitely his. He mentioned that he had been thinking about having a proper wedding ceremony soon. Seo-hye paused, wondering if it could really happen, a ceremony for them. After all the things he'd already done for her, she was more than satisfied. Not long after making that promise, Kwon Yoon worked his magic and had Seo-hye adopted by a noble family that was struggling financially, making her a noble herself. He didn't stop there. The young master confronted his uncle, Master Kwon, telling him that he could handle the family business with or without his help. He drew a firm line in the sand. Master Kwon was furious, calling him an insolent fool and cursing him for not helping to strengthen the family's political standing. He stormed off in anger, and that was the last time anyone in that household saw him. Even the head servant worried that Kwon Yoon was making impulsive decisions, but he didn't listen to anyone. He meant every word he said about doing anything to be with Seo-hye. He mentioned that he had already consulted the elders, and they'd agreed that the wedding could be held in a month. He had tried to convince them to move it up, but that was the earliest they could manage on short notice. Seo-hye said she was doing just fine, though she was troubled by the fact that Kwon Yoon was giving up everything for her. She told him she'd be content if she could just be his mistress. Kwon Yoon asked, "Why? Would you be okay if the elders forced me to marry someone else?" His gaze was intense as he waited for her response. She paused, thinking it over. She definitely wouldn't want him to marry someone else, but she didn't want the world to hate him. He pulled her into a hug and reassured her that everything would be fine. He told her to focus on her health and their child, and not to worry about anything else. Kwon Yoon said it didn't matter whether they had a boy or a girl, as long as their child was healthy. Then, teasing her a little, he added that he'd actually prefer a girl because she'd be as beautiful as Seo-hye. She blushed at his words. Seo-hye replied that she'd be happy as long as he was happy. All that mattered to her was being together as a family. She thanked him for being hers and held his hand. Legally married or not, he had made her the happiest woman in the world. She asked him to kiss her, and he did, with all the passion in the world. The two of them shared an intimate moment. Afterward, Kwon Yoon gently touched her face, his love shining through. Kwon Yoon says they belonged together, and he knew it from the very beginning. He always believed they'd end up together. It's a beautiful love story, full of ups and downs, but no matter what, love stood strong above everything else. The young master can't promise that their lives will always be easy, but he caresses her hair gently and assures her that he'll always be by her side. His heart belongs to Seo-hye, and it will, until the very end. He just wants her to know that Kwon Yoon loves her so, so much. We've come to the end of the story. Drop a comment expressing your thoughts concerning it. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell to stay updated. Until next time, ciao.